industry stuff with the mining, the history of the war. Everything they've done has been exemplary. And it's not just Ron for this book. Catherine, you are to be definitely part of it. And I take exception to the fact that Ron is the author, but you both are the authors. And I specifically state that as is in our house, it's a joint effort, and everything you do, you support one another, and I'm very proud of you. Now for the book, isn't it amazing that in 1884, this railway line was proposed, and it took 26 years to get it up and running. Well, the rail trail took 18 years, so something's different. We're a little bit closer than they were with getting the railway line up and going. But the unbelievable part is the bureaucracy and the politics involved in getting the railway line up and running from Wagga Wagga to Tumbarumba. For us to get a rail trail from Rosewood to Tumbarumba is exactly the same. So as far as bureaucracy and politics is concerned, nothing's changed in 126 years. And it's amazing that the trials and tribulations that our forebears had and the forethought that they had in putting this railway line into place for it to be opened in 1921 was spectacular. And we're humbled by their forethought, and we're humbled by the fact that they had the strength and the ability to put it in place. And there's nothing different with the rail trail. An enormous group of people have worked sincerely together over many, many years, 18 that is, to put this rail trail together. And Ron and Kath have been a part of that for many of those years. Now, Ron and Kath were given through the Historical Society an onerous task to put together history boards for our rail trail to be placed at the old railway station sites along the trail. And when they started doing the research, they found they had so much information they couldn't put it on these boards. And therefore, they decided to produce a book. And when Ron and Kath go to work on a book, you know that when it's completed, it's going to be done with enormous special work on their behalf, and I congratulate them. Now, the rail trail itself has been an outstanding success since it opened on the 3rd of April, and I don't think any of us could be more proud of the fact that so many local people have gone out and utilised the facility that has been made available for them. And the history boards are part of that. The driver's residence, or the old driver's barracks at Figure Street. We've got the men's shed building, or putting together or repairing an old railway guards van, which will also go there. And that's all part of the historical precinct. And all of that historical precinct comes back to Ron and Catherine. So I would like to launch this book. In doing so, I want everybody to charge their glasses, as I have. I'm drinking champagne because I think it is one of the most important facets of our livelihood. And I'm humbled to have been given the chance to launch this book. So everybody out there, charge your glasses. Please be upstanding. And I'd like to launch Tumbarumba-Rosewood Train and Cycle History book. Congratulations, Ron and Kath.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Well done.
Yes.
Cheers. Okay.
I guess it's
so very much for allowing me to be able to launch your book on your behalf. Thank you.
So thank yous for a start. Let's not beat around the bush. Thank you, Catherine. thank you to everyone who participated, who contributed to this. We had numerous discussions sitting in front of this computer where it all went together. One name on the bottom, two names on the bottom, authored by, contributed by, collated by, and Catherine kept scrubbing her name off and saying, no, it's your book, you've done all the work, you've spent the hours, it's your book. But you are right, Owen, absolutely right. It should be the both of us, and I hereby declare it is both of us. Did I get out of that?
No. Can I just say, I have to say something here. I've said to everybody who's read the book, if you find any mistakes, a misplaced comma, apostrophe, or whatever, I do not want to know. Just keep it to yourself, okay? Because that was my
Promise
job.
to keep it to ourselves.
As I hinted before, I've done most of the work, the legwork. Catherine does the interviews and the transcribing and that sort of thing amazingly well. I do the research, I do the setup for the book, I fix all the bits and pieces, and then after I've finished, Kath comes along and fixes it up. And basically that's why you get the product that you do. It's all down
No, it isn't.
to Catherine.
Let's keep going.
So, Owen, thank you. I've written on my notes here, Mr. Persistent. This whole exercise would not have come to fruition without the committee, and particularly without your leadership of it, without Grant's leadership of it, Bob's input, Tonia Beckett's input to it. It's been a wonderful local exercise which has been able to harness local enthusiasm and basically has kept the whole thing on track, and it's down to your leadership. So thank you for launching the book, but also thank you for driving the whole exercise. Thank you to Julia and to Carly for setting up this exercise. It came quite out of the blue. It wasn't our suggestion, but we really, really do appreciate it. And already through the publicity that this thing has generated, there has been a spike in sales of the book. And that's important because I say it now and it'll be said again, all proceeds from the book go to the Historical Society. So don't buy one, buy two and give one away because it's going to a very good cause. Secondly, the finance for this, the Bushfire Recovery Event Fund has funded this event, and that's administered by Snowy Valleys Council, and we thank them. In terms of printing the book, we were lucky to score a Tumbarumba community grant earlier on, which I think Julia said, you know, my thing was the book instantly went from this big to this, well, it's not quite that big, but yeah. A great help. It didn't cover all the costs, obviously, but went a long way. And so to Bendigo Bank, to Snowy Valleys Council, and to the Pine Community Trust, thank you very much. Credit to Chambers White, who have done an amazing job. And I take my hat off to them. They've really, really lifted. When you send off a print-ready PDF, you know, it's like having a baby. Not that I know about that, but you never know what's going to come back. And in this case, the product is outstanding. I was asked by the newspaper just last week why I wrote a book. And I'd have thought the answer was pretty obvious. I can't help myself. That's why I write a book. But in this case, Owen hinted at it, and he's dead right. We, as the Historical Society, were charged with producing quality, that was in the funding deed, history boards, and I think we've done that. But as soon as you start looking around, very, very quickly, you run out of space. You get a story and you could maybe use one sentence out of the story. You can use one picture where you've got half a dozen pictures. And so instantly, very, very early on, in the 3 or 4 years of collection, we decided on a book, and this is the result. The reaction to the book. Can I again offer a vote of thanks to those people who have bought a book or have seen the book, I'm overwhelmed basically by the feedback that we've had. Absolutely amazing. And I think there's got to be a reason for that. And can I spend 2 minutes and maybe just talk about the philosophy behind the book and the philosophy behind all the history that we do? And I'm well qualified to do this. I've got a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, so I can pontificate on history. I've written down here on my cheat sheet, nothing exists in isolation. Oh. Well, I don't know about your house, but in isolation here, there's plenty of things happening and not much else. But I think...
Elaborate, Ron.
Ida and Elke can probably explain this idea a little better. We were reading Urania the other night through Skype. Urania is a little spider, builds a web. First the cross piece, then the frame, and round in the spiral until it's perfect. First the cross piece, then the frame, round and round in the spiral until it's perfect. Beautiful idea. History to me isn't about the main frame. It's about dragging in all these other ideas and all these influences that come along with it. And I think that's one of the reasons that the book has been so popular. It's not a railway history. I'm sorry, I don't denigrate railway buffs. The work you do is absolutely essential and amazing, but I think it only tells a part of the story. When we were in Byron Bay last year, one of the speakers was Marcus Zuzak. And Marcus then, and I wrote it down because it just struck me so much as applying to this, we start becoming who we are long before we are born. We start becoming who we are long before we are born. And to me, what's that saying is we've all got a backstory. We've all got a history. Things have got a history. Places have got a history. And so we've tried in the book to bring that out as well. And I've written a little section in there which I've entitled Renaming the Land. And I'll just read a little bit to you. 1839 this is. The day before reaching Tumbarumba, Bingham surveyed two properties closer to Tumut, Manus and Dutson, both of which were licensed to Philip Gidley King. P.G. King had travelled with Charles Darwin on the epic scientific circumnavigation of the globe. He continued his explorations in the local area and thankfully left some of the earliest surviving local written and pictorial records. In 1836 or 7, when William Guise occupied this area, he copied what was assumed to be the indigenous name, Ondelamine. Nearby was a seasonal lake or wetland, identified by P.G. King as Woodamalina. Beautiful names. Roll them across your tongue. Sadly, this connection with ancient tradition was soon lost. In 1848, D.R. Gale took the 20,000 acres and named it Glen Roy. The wetland became Lake Roy. Later, partners split the holding, John McAuliffe retained Glenroy, Patrick Craven taking Rosewood, Glenroy passing to Menzies, to Wolseley and then to A.J. Ryle. When a new name appeared, Wolseley Park. This is a bit sad, and I hope you can read more into it than what I've said there. What we've got is an anglicising, not only of the naming of the place, but of the place itself. And where this becomes important in the book is when you jump forward in the book and you read the little wonderful article by Kylie Durant when she talks about the revegetation of the land. And it was great with Bob the other day and Kylie and David McGinnity to go and talk about some of this work. Is it 500 of the snow gums? Yes, snow gums. Snow gums, a species that has survived in this area, in the Glenroy area, since the last ice age. And by recognising this past history, we're able very easily to bring this forward. The other thing we do to drag out from the background are the families, the Woolsleys, the Ryles, and the Fettlers. And we were able to find and talk to those, if not directly, then to their descendants. This is how the barracks came. It was taken by a Fettler, it was used on the farm, it was returned by the Fettler's son. This is the sort of place Tumbarumba is. It's a wonderful place to look at history. People were amazed when they read the book and travelled along and looked at the signs, the strength of the communities, the Wolseley Parks, the Glenroys. Unless we record that now, that's lost. And I think within most people we've talked to, that's an important thing to keep going. Bringing out also are many of the old occupations. Yes, we know about timber, we know about gold. Did we know Tumbarumba was a prime dairy place? It had a number of dairy factories. I was walking out at Wolseley Park, pardon me, with one of the Blaze Aid people, an Englishman, actually residing in Melbourne, who'd come up for the day. He was a doctor. And he asked about Wolseley, and I was able to talk to him about, the shearing plant. He came here, he set up a mountain cattle industry with Ryle. But he also invented the shearing plant, the mechanical shearing plant. He went and teamed up with Austin, an engineer from Melbourne. They then went to England and they become the company that manufactured Austin Wolseley motor cars. This place has important links, and it also has worker links, and we were able to tap into those. The Wolseley Park Mechanics Institute is another one that has cropped up. And I stopped the two of us when we were riding at Wolseley Park the other day, because in the paddock there, next time you go, just north of the, just west of the station site, there are still 4 pegs in the ground there, which mark out the site of the old Wolseley Park Mechanics Institute. Who holds the title to that, I don't know, but I think the deeds might be in the archives of the library. I'll have to look into that. There was another aspect to the book, and that is any sort of history in my book has to be personal. You have to let the past speak for itself. So in the book, we haven't edited, we haven't changed, we've let the newspaper reports, we've let the people's reports speak for themselves, because the language is important. We also used a fair bit of work from newspapers. And if there was any doubt that Tumbarumba didn't need a railway from 18, what was it, Kath?
92. There was appeared in the Albury Banner and the Wodonga Express, when he had half a glass of wine, on the 15th of June, 1892, a little news article. The Tumbarumba Express is a splendid 6-horse van finished off at Williams for Mr. E. O'Friel of this town, and will be a great boon to the public, as it will make fortnightly trips between here and Wagga. It's time to leave here Saturday, arrive Wagga Sunday, leave Wagga Tuesday, and arrive back in Tumbarumba on Wednesday. So that was 1892, quite an entrepreneur, but obviously a railway or something better, because the road was pretty terrible, was really needed. But I mean, Ron mentioned the language. It's just lovely that people's memories in here in their own voice. And even mentioned the 1884 Progress Committee report about why we needed a railway. This delightful language, and he talks about it'll be a great place for excursionists to come and enjoy the fresh mountain air and recover themselves and all the rest of it. So all that language is really there.
I said we use Trove a lot. If you haven't played with Trove, set aside 100,000 hours and get into it. It is just fascinating. For those overseas people, Trove is a digitised newspaper service. You have that in England, I've used it, and Scotland. And you get out of this lots and lots and lots of stories, and you get local stories. You know, some are believable, some aren't. The standard was, and it comes up over and over again, and it's told so many times it must be true. If you wanted to catch the train, you went down to the railway line, you stood on the line, waved to the driver, and he stopped and picked you up. Did the same on the way home, of course. There are lots of those.
There's another story, a mushroom story. Again, it's one of these that it must have happened because we've heard about it from so many people. We've heard that the train crew would get out sometimes in the middle of paddock at Mawara or Wolseley Park or you name it, and they would boil the billy and have a cup of tea, and the passengers would get out, and sometimes they'd pick blackberries, but often they would all stop and pick mushrooms. Now this is a little bit of deja vu because good friends and cyclists, Bob and Ros Gay, the other day were riding the rail trail, didn't get off the train, but actually got off their bikes and picked enough mushrooms to take home and have with their dinner. So this is, you're not looking back to history. Here you've got history repeating itself. And it's just these little stories that mean so much, I think, they mean so much to us and hopefully to everybody else. And the collection, I think, turns more personal then, and it's my turn to just read you something. This is written by a lovely lady, Diane Blake, who of course is no longer with us, but a lady who had a prodigious memory. She could just remember everything. And she went down on what was called the fish and chip special when she was pregnant because the roads were so terrible. So she wrote this many, many years ago about the tin hair fish and chip special. And she said, people of all ages enjoyed the trip as we wound around the hills, down the downfall, through miles of private property where stock were hooted off the line, and occasionally passengers alighted with a steep drop into the paddocks at Mawara and Sunny Hills near Rosewood, and later in the morning near Wagga. The chatter was incessant, Diane liked to talk, as bags of sweets, fruits, sandwiches and thermoses were passed around with the guard collecting tickets and having a word to say about the weather, the state of the world, blessedly far away it seemed, and who was on top of the group footy as he wandered up and down the aisle. Then she talks about getting there. The return trip at 5:30 p.m. seemed to take much longer as everyone had boarded the train with tired children and loaded with parcels of all descriptions. But once on our merry way, like horses headed for home, we had plenty to tell of the day's delights and disappointments, and when half an hour of leaving Wagga were soon sharing bundles of fish and chips and pies, etc., proving quite a highlight of the trip home. Nearing Tumba station about 9 p.m, I got on at 5:30, there'd be a general hubbub of folk stirring, waking up and getting ready for our arrival, with bags and baskets and parcels falling from the top racks. The taxis were lined up patiently and loved ones waiting to hear all about the trip and the people we met during our day in the big city. Oh, I just love that because they've been away for a day, but the loved ones are waiting to hear about the trip to the city. And there's lots of those in the book.
So, I think, as I said, the strength of it is it preserves the languages, it preserves the idea, and is there in complete form. And another one, and again, there are lots of these things that came out. It was a problem to select them, actually, but one, in the Albury Banner, there was a children's column. And if you want to know anything and be honest and be told an honest answer, you asked a child. Here was one in 1911. And it's Dear Uncle Jeff, it's raining today. The ground is covered with water. On Thursday and Friday mornings, we had a very severe frost. On Friday morning, when we went to school, we found the ink was frozen. There is to be a euchre party dance in the hall on Wolseley Park. Some of the wattle trees are out in bloom up here. This is a sure sign that the spring is near. The foxes and rabbits are plentiful up this way. We have two of our paddocks netted in, and most of the rabbits killed out of them. But there are plenty in the unnetted paddocks. Rabbits and fox skins are good price in the market now. I'm going to have a try at this month's competition. Your fond nephew, Stephen Logan. In 1916, Stephen Logan enlisted for World War I. In 1917, he was in the trenches in France. He came back. He was the first returned soldier to cross the overpass bridge at the top of the downfall. And so the welcoming committee who came out of town to see him there dubbed that bridge Stuart's Bridge. It's a real shame that, his brother was Stuart.
He was Stephen.
My apologies. It's a real shame that that bridge is no longer there, but let's look forward to the next stage of the rail trail.
And there's one other one here from the Albury Banner asking another child, Alma Wiley. And again, the names are all the names that are still here. This one was from 1922. Dear Uncle Jeff, I was glad to see my last letter in print. We've had a lot of rain lately. Dad has finished pruning the fruit trees. We are milking 14 cows now. There are 29 pupils going to our school. We had a school dance on August the 18th. I'm 10 years and 1 month old. Would any of the Banner cousins correspond with me? I went to the Wagga show and enjoyed myself. I saw the aeroplane, but didn't go for a flight. I was on the merry-go-round 3 times. I slept all the way home in the train and got home after sunrise. Your fond niece, Alma Wiley. Now, the trains that took people to the show and so on would wait until about 9 o'clock to come home so that the kids and the parents would really enjoy it. But that's just a lovely snapshot of what it was like in her district. I mean, there were fruit growing, there were cows to milk, there was the Wolseley Park, the dairy company, and then there's a little girl who looked at the aeroplane in 1922, but the family probably couldn't afford for her to go for a ride, but she did go on the merry-go-round 3 times.
The other thing to me that letter really shows, and you learn so much from these kids about school, about dances, about all sorts of things. Who was it barnstorming in Wagga in those days in 1920? That's very early. It also shows how much Tumbarumba at that time came to be Wagga-centric. The railway really turned the outlook of Tumbarumba people around from being Tumut, Adelong was the main base, and Gundagai, into a Wagga-centric place. That's where the centre came. That's where the cattle came up from. That's where the sheep came up from. And that's where I think it's moulded Tumbarumba into that sort of outlook. So we learn so much, and we can read so much into those things. You actually come by things in quite accidental ways often. I was looking at all sorts of special trains that ran up and down. There were numerous these. They came up from for the rodeo, for the football final, for the show, and Tumbarumba people went down to the Wagga show. And one of them that struck my mind was the Queen's visit in 1954. And I just happened to be talking about these at coffee one morning, and Ron Blake said, I was on that train. So I got him to tell us about it. And here's what he said. The day we went down to Wagga to see the Queen was a huge day. I don't know what I expected. Probably a princess with a crown and all the trimmings. I had never been out of Tumbarumba before, let alone on a train. There were thousands. I had never seen so many people in my life. I was at Union Jack School in 1954, and only the older pupils were allowed to go. I can't remember how I got to the station, but I know we started in the dark. The rail motor was full And going down the downfall, it was funny to stick your head out the window and see all the other kids' heads poking out all along the train. I suppose we marched to the Wagga station, from the Wagga station to Bolton Park. There was a lot of emphasis on marching in those days. Union Jack always won the marching competition at the school sports carnival. We were in groups, all crammed into the middle of the park. And the Queen drove around us in an open car, waving to us. No crown, just a nice lady in a light blue dress. It was all over in about half an hour. Back home in the dark again. What a great day we had. I went to the archives in Wagga and I said, you must have pictures of the Queen's visit. Now, can I hold that up? There's a nice lady in a dress, lots and lots and lots of kids, and there she is, waving. This is what I love about research, is when things all come together, where you get a newspaper report, you get an oral report, and you get a photographic report and so on. The picture just gets thicker and thicker and thicker, and it's just wonderful. Another one that comes up like this, which is, I think, how are we going for time, Julia?
Yeah, we're right.
We're right, good.
5 minutes or so.
The train was continually running into stock, whether it was mobs of sheep or whether it was cows, because it wasn't fenced. If farmers wanted the rail line fenced, they paid for it themselves. Hardy Gray, I know, lost 4 or 5, and then he said, well, he applied and was given permission, but he had to pay for it himself. There was a newspaper report in the Sydney Morning Herald. Cow strikes prize bull.
No, train.
Train.
Cow. Sorry, train strikes.
Thank you. This is why you fix all my mistakes. Train strikes and kills a bull in the Sydney Morning Herald. The train was delayed, a bus came and picked the people up. They didn't get home until late. The Telegraph reported on the same thing. Wild bull charges train and is killed. That's the Telegraph. Then I mentioned this to Ursula O'Brien and said, I was on a train once, about that time, which hit, she thought it was a cow, but perhaps it was the same. And it says exactly the same thing. You've got 2, 3 versions of the same thing all coming together. It's the sort of history I love. It's just wonderful. Where do we go now?
Stories keep coming.
The stories keep coming. Yeah, there are lots and lots. The best one of all, I suppose, is a real one in terms of just before we published the book, we got contact with Peter Lane. He spelled his name L-E-A-N-E, Lane. We had him in the book because his father was the last station master at Tumbarumba, and we, of course, had written him L-A-N-E, as everyone else had done. He had the station master's carriage key, which he wanted to donate to the Historical Society. This is a treasure. If you're a collector of railway items, we've got it locked up. There's another one. We'll keep him anonymous. We'll call him Pat. He's probably related to most of the Goldspinks in town. But Pat came to me one day and said, yeah, I've got something that I could probably donate to the Historical Society. I was coming back from, I think it was Rockhampton, he said. I would have to check with him. By train, got to Wagga, bought a ticket to come up to Tumbarumba on the train, and I found it was going to be 5 hours. So I went for a walk around, and while I was there, I saw a car for sale, so I bought it and I drove home, which is a good enough story in itself. But Pat, being the collector he is, still has that ticket.
What a shame we didn't know about that before.
And history is still being made, of course. It's being made in the conversion. And Owen talked really, really well about this. I'm not going to go into that, except that we have devoted a third of the book to the conversion. We couldn't get right up to the end, but it's mostly photographic. Thank you to all those people who shared their photographs, who who planted trees, who did all the work. The men's shed, the historical society, the garden clubs. Tumbarumba is that sort of place, isn't it? This is how we thrive. This is how we support one another. And this is how things like this become the sort of success stories that they really are. And Tumbarumba is such a great place to live in because of that very reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Julie.
I'll clap. And you can see everyone else is clapping. And
Julia, just before you move on, I think we should have a best dressed prize, and I think Jane Buchan takes it because she's got this wonderful fascinator on there, and being an old Tumbarumba family person, congratulations, Jane, on preparing yourself for the occasion.
Can I just say, I have to apologise to all my friends and relatives to whom I said, especially overseas, well, it doesn't matter if you come in your pyjamas because we won't be able to see you. Thankfully, my cousin Jean is not in her pyjamas and neither is Ian. But, you know, all these other people, I said, it doesn't matter what you wear, we won't be able to see you. And some of you we can. So anyway,
I did notice she was drinking coffee though, not wine.
Yeah, Jean was drinking coffee, not wine.
it is nice to see everyone. And Jane, I've unmuted you if you'd just like to say something about your dress.
Well, there's a double reason here, because just prior to this, we had a Zoom with friends of ours from Wagga that we all used to be in Wagga, but we live up near Newcastle now. And it's Gold Cup Day, you see. So we have a Zoom every Friday night with a drink, and we have a theme. So today it was Gold Cup. So I thought, well, I'll just stay the same because this is a special occasion. So there you go. So cheers. Thank you very much.
And I have my winter coat on because it's so cold in Wagga today.
And my daughter made this hat in her Year 12 formal, so thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And yes, it was the Gold Cup today, and it turned out to be a really good Gold Cup not to go to, so which was very good. Now we have got some questions, and the first question comes from Deb Harris, who's been very, very involved in the rail trail. So over to you, Deb.
Hello. Ron and Kath, congratulations. Do you hold the original advocates of the railway in the same esteem as the local rail trail volunteer committee for their forethought and perseverance? No pressure.
Thanks, Deb. Owen already alluded to that.
Well, having been on the committee, I've got to declare a possible conflict of interest, haven't I? Let's look at it let's break it down a bit. It took, how long, Owen? 30 or what years to build the railway line? It took 18 years to...
26 years to build it and 18 years
for
for
us
us
until
to be
21. 84 to 21.
26 years, you said, to build it.
Oh, to build it? No. I'm saying from conception to
1884 to 1921. Yeah.
21,
Okay,
which is
okay.
what, 30
30 odd years.
Yeah, okay. This one took 18 years, you say? You've been, since you dreamt of it?
Yeah. Oh, since we started the work in talking to the local community, yes.
Okay, so one took 37 years, one took 18 years.
Half the time.
Let's break it down to a number of years per mile.
It's too much. No.
But
Building it means hand.
only Grant Harris can answer that.
Let's look at it in terms of the work habits. It was built with basically pick and shovel, cart and dray. It was converted with bulldozers and whatever. Who wins? Considering that per mile they built it quicker. What about we look at finances? The original was built under unknown circumstances. 1900, they had a depression, a severe financial depression.
Enormous drought.
Off to fight a war in South Africa. They then fought a war in Europe. They had to apply for funding piecemeal. As they did one bit, they did the next. Now, I know Snowy Valleys Council didn't get the 5 million or whatever it was up front, but at least they had a big part of the budget and they knew what was coming. Who wins? No doubt behind both of the groups, there had to be political goodwill. It took a long, long time for that to be achieved in New South Wales. There are still a few who are kicking and screaming, but we've beaten them. And there also, as I think I said before, there has to be a local community and a local committee who keep this thing driving. And I started off by praising you in that regard. And this, I think, is the secret for any group who wants to build a rail trail in New South Wales from now on. We've broken the mould. There is a template there. If there is community goodwill and there has to be an economic stimulus coming from the state after this breakdown, any council, any group who doesn't get on board, who aren't ready to go, are going to miss the boat because money is going to spin and it will be available first in, best dressed. Or if you've done your homework, you will get on board because rail trails are here, they're here to stay. We know they are so successful here already. You don't have to go looking interstate. But the committee here has kept us going through merger and through all the problems that created. So, Deb, I think we won hands down.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you, Ron. Now, Gemma Pritchard has a question.
Oh, I'm not sure that I have a question. Sorry, I joined in. And look, I remember catching we've been involved in Tumbarumba for coming up to 39 years now. Obviously, we had a bit of bad luck on New Year's Eve, but you know, as so many of our other friends did. I remember catching the train down. So we must have been one of, you know, the last couple of years. Mum and Dad would come down to Tumba and we'd catch the train down for school holidays and just simply cannot wait to get back to Tumbarumba when isolation ends and to walk the rail trail. And thank you to absolutely everybody that's been involved because I've watched it from a distance and I'm really excited with everything that you guys have done to get this up. I know it's been such a long haul for you.
Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you very much, Gemma. It certainly has been a long haul, and I think Ron's got a very good point about the success of it is already evident, and it's the start of many great rail trails to be, so which is excellent. Now, do we have anyone else? Can I see any other hands up? I'll put you over to Deirdre Greenbush. Okay, Dee, you're on.
Hi, Ron. Hi, Kath. Hi, everyone. Congratulations on your book. It's, you know, the best thing for Tumbarumba. It's just so well done. I'm just wondering whether there's any prospect of an extension of the rail trail. Do we get as far as Rosewood and that's it, or do you think it'll go on further?
Owen.
Yes to that. I think Julia, she's totally behind a push to get the trail from Rosewood through to Tarcutta. And I would imagine that we can probably form a committee. Our committee is a little tired for some reason, but we would give unbelievable support to anybody that wants to champion that trail. And when you consider the downfall is in the middle of it, and Tarcutta really needs people, and Hume absolutely needs people to come and visit them. And I can't see any reason for us not to pursue that rail trail. And that gives us 70 kilometres, which is a 2 or 3 day jaunt, which most holiday people really would like to do. And with public transport at either end, what a great opportunity for all of us.
It was one of Tim Fisher's wishes.
Can I just add to that? I believe, having walked it a number of times, and no doubt, Deirdre, you have as well, the downfall, along with the Batlow-Tumut rail trail, would form two of the most spectacular rail trails anywhere within the world. There is no doubt. The countryside, okay, I might need an electric bike. I need an electric bike now. But the country and the countryside and what you see there is just absolutely spectacular. And they would both add on, and the Wagga end as well, to making a long haul, come and stay for a week and ride the rail trails.
Yeah. Ron, there's one question that was sent in. Have any further stories come to light when writing the book? And so will there be a chapter 2 of the book or another book?
Well, I mentioned the carriage key and the ticket. Yeah. Every time you talk to someone, yeah, I remember being on the train. People talk about it, they see the book, and I remember that. And there are no doubt lots and lots and lots of stories still out and about, and they'll come, as I think will lots and lots of artefacts, like the ticket, like the, you know, once we get a museum display and so on, they will certainly be forthcoming. But yeah, everyone's got a story, and the same sort of story comes up over and over again. There was one the other day, I went shooting rabbits. Got the train, got off, train came back the next day, picked us up. What was the price of a ticket? Oh, fresh rabbit.
Fresh rabbit.
There are lots.
The other thing that we didn't sort of mention here, but the station in Tumbarumba was quite an emotional place in a way. I mean, you heard Diane Blake saying our loved ones were waiting, and people went to Wagga to buy headdresses for their wedding and all sorts of things, doctor's appointments. But the station was also used to, the town band used to play off every person going to war, for example. And you can just imagine how emotional that must have been. They probably played them back when they came back, hopefully. But just the fact that 2 or 3 of the guys from the town band were up there playing the people off as they got on the train, maybe bagpipes, I don't know what they had. And,
no, it was a full brass band.
The brass band. And yeah, there's a couple of stories in the book of people who were played off in the early 1940s and so on to the thing. There is another story, if we've got just 2 seconds. You're talking about things that might appear. When the official cutting of the ribbon happened in 1921, the parliamentarians were all here like they were going to be for the opening. And Mr. Estelle, the Minister for Railways and stuff like that, cut the ribbon with a pair of specially inscribed silver scissors. Now we've written all over the place. We've written to the parliamentary secretary. We've tried to get all these scissors see if we could get the scissors back, but we can't. But we're really pretty sure that the scissors maybe ended up in Mrs. Estelle's sewing basket. So if there's anybody out there related to the Estelles who hailed from Cessnock, I think, and have got those scissors, we'd love a photo. But no, we couldn't get the scissors back for the cutting of the ribbon. But, you know, there's all sorts of little offshoots that happen. So.
Not yet, anyhow. This might be the beginning.
No.
Carly has a question for you.
For both of you, Catherine and Ron, what's your most memorable interview and why? It doesn't have to be a story, but yeah, something that's memorable for you guys with coming up with this book.
It's probably little things that may not have even been. I mean, Diane, because I have great respect for Diane. I loved what she always wrote, but people talked about travelling on the train and wanting a drink of water. That sounds a bit, you know, whatever. And Anne Gollan, I think, writes in her book that her dad had to stand and brace his feet really hard to get a drink of water out of this carafe that was hanging on the wall. And there was one glass for everybody in the train to use, which of course is not very peaceful these days. But he had to brace himself. And one other lady remembered particularly the sound of the water sloshing in this carafe as the train went by. Now, without saying it was a bumpety ride, just that sort of little memory, I think, reminds you of what it must. It probably wasn't a very comfortable ride. I mean, people talk about it being cold and drafty and all the rest of it. Can you think of any Ron Blakes that you've already talked about, I suppose? But
yeah, Ron's I enjoyed because it just put such a slant on something that I knew, and it made personal the newspaper report, which to me rounds out the history more than any of the stories that have done that. I think the contact with the Griffiths family, I think, has to rate way up there because they've still got all the memorabilia and the docket books and the and so on from his tools and wallets and so on, but also was able to return that barracks, which is, you know, he was going to burn it basically. He didn't want it until we were on it, and it was donated to the Historical Society. And that, I think, contributes so much to the whole package of the history place up there. Plus, we've got the personal story that goes with it. So, in terms of input, that has to rate very, very highly.
Well, I'm very sorry that hour has just gone in 5 minutes. It was really fascinating, Ron and Kath, and also Owen and Kathy, and to everyone who's come, and you know, to have people from overseas and from other rail trails around New South Wales. It's very exciting to have you here, and to see all the locals, and you can see on the locals' faces your stories, how they're impacting, because we know these people, we know this area. It just means such a lot for us, and to have that all documented in such a professional way just means a lot to us all. I'm going to unmute everyone so you can yell and scream and cheers.
Cheers. Cheers again.
And finally, I'm just going to show you the details.
Joan Pritchard.
So, and this is where you can buy your copies.
This name.